Creating a compelling antagonist is crucial to any story. They are the driving force that propels the protagonist into action and raises the stakes. Here are 9 essential rules for creating a memorable antagonist. Number 1 is the antagonist's main purpose is to force the protagonist into making 2 or 3 key decisions throughout the story. Essentially, there are a couple of moments where the antagonist forces the protagonist into a situation where they have to make a choice. Typically, there might be 2 choices. They'll make a choice toward the beginning of the film, and obviously at this point, they most likely would be making the wrong choice. Then, the antagonist gives them another choice at the end of the film, and in this case, the protagonist would more likely make the correct choice, or they might be able to choose a different option altogether, depending on the themes of your story. Number 2 is the antagonist must be uniquely adept at attacking your protagonist's greatest weakness. This is why you see a lot of antagonists in film who just happen to be either a family member, an old friend, an old mentor, and just someone who has a unique connection to the protagonist. Someone who specifically understands the protagonist's weaknesses in a way that they can take advantage. Number 3 is that the antagonist doesn't always need to be a person. The antagonist doesn't even need to be a living thing at all. A few examples of this, so going for the non-person angle, we have films like Jaws, there's just a killer shark. Then there's movies like Castaway, where there's no real personified antagonist. Instead, you could probably say the antagonist is the island. You could even say the antagonist is perhaps time itself. In a lot of films and a lot of stories, the antagonist is the world, the environment. You would see this a lot in disaster films, all those movies about twisters and hurricanes, all of those end of the world films, and a lot of those stories will try to put in some kind of human bad guy so that there is someone that we can hate along the way, where in actual fact they're not necessarily the bad guy. The antagonist of the film is the world, it is the environment. Keep in mind when you're writing your stories that the antagonist doesn't need to be human, and you can think a little bit outside of the box as to what other options are out there. Number 4 is that the antagonist doesn't always see themselves as the bad guy. More often than not, the antagonist will have some kind of justification for what they're doing. Of course, to us as viewers, it's not a good enough reason, but the antagonists themselves may have convinced themselves that the end justifies the means. The antagonist has created their own moral compass, which is often skewed from the norm. Adding in this kind of complexity makes them more than a one-dimensional villain. Number 5, which is connected to what I said for number 2, is the protagonist and the antagonist are 2 sides of the same coin. They are the yin to each other's yang. The best antagonists are often a mirror image of the protagonist, and in a lot of cases, they may have even shared the same or a similar past experience or trauma, and the main difference is how they reacted to that past trauma and how that has influenced their way of life. Number 6 is that the antagonist doesn't necessarily need to be evil. Again, talking about Jaws, the shark isn't evil, it's just hungry and maybe a bit stressed. By giving an antagonist motivations that are understandable, if not relatable, then you create a character who is more nuanced and believable. Number 7 is that the antagonist has their own motivations and goals. So a lot of the things I've been saying here are just to help flesh out who the antagonist is and make them feel as though they aren't just existing in a void, and that they do have a past, they do have details that make them feel real. The important part is to remember that the antagonist has a goal. There is something that they want to achieve throughout this film, and they are constantly trying to pursue it. Even during the moments that we don't see them, they are still actively trying to pursue that objective. Number 8, just like your protagonist, the antagonist needs to have flaws and weaknesses, even if these flaws and weaknesses aren't necessarily obvious at first sight. Because despite how scary you want your villain to be, there still does need to be some kind of chink in the chain that the protagonist can eventually use to overcome this villain. Number 9 takes it a step further from the previous 2 steps, where we are now going to give the antagonist some unique quirks, traits, and habits. This is, of course, for the stories where the antagonist is some kind of humanoid character. For your antagonist, you can embed them with unique ways of speaking, a unique accent, maybe they have a tic, maybe they do have a particular addiction or an obsession over something that could be mundane in life, you know? Maybe they're a clean freak. And just adding in all of these little details just makes them feel a bit more fleshed out, makes them feel a little bit more real, and therefore the stakes that they present to the protagonist also feel more real and believable. By following these simple steps and rules, you can create an antagonist that is multi-dimensional and adds depth and intrigue to your story. A well-crafted antagonist not only challenges the protagonist, but they also make your story as a whole more compelling and memorable.